All right. Hello, everyone. Happy St. David's Day. Welcome to my talk. My name's Huw James. I was just about to say what I do for a living, but the purpose of this talk is all about the multiple things that I do for a living and those blended careers that we're going to talk about. Hope you've been having fun so far at the virtual, always virtual careers fair. I know there's been a lot going on, so we're going to keep this to around 30 minutes. And then we're going to leave about 15 minutes for questions at the end too. So if you have questions, you can ask those questions. They'll come into my chat so that I can utilize them at the end and answer any of those questions that you've got back there. So if you've got any burning questions that you've got coming through as we go through the talk, then you can answer them at the end. But this talk is going to be all about those blended careers and things that you can do with multiple different skills. And I'm going to try and convince you that learning and school in many forms is a really good way of thinking about your career and taking on board as many skills as possible. All right. So first off, a little bit about me.
My name's Huw James. I'm a photographer and filmmaker and a mountaineer and a trail runner. I'm lucky enough to get to travel the world and explore new places. And today I've been running these trails and find out what the Swiss Alps has to offer. Exploration means something different to almost everyone. On your personal journey, every new place is new exploration. So what I try and do when I go to new places around the world is find places that I've never been to, meeting new people, seeing new things and views that I've never seen before. And especially when you've got to kind of hike up a mountain and put the hard work in to get there, it means that that view is all the more incredible when you do get there. In my day job as a presenter and a communicator, I really enjoy sharing my adventures with people around the world. So through things like Facebook Live, Instagram and Twitter, I would really like to be able to drag people up these mountains with us, but it's not always possible. So being able to share with audiences around the world these kind of locations is perfect.
So all those things that you saw in that film are skills that I've picked up along the last few years. And I'm going to try and convince you that exploration in all its facets, not just the physical side of exploration, but also things like, learning, exploring with the mind as well as with the body are all really, really important things to do to make a blended career, to make the career that you really want. So yeah, exploration is absolutely key. I didn't come from an illustrious background. This is where I grew up. I still absolutely love it. I still live. I'm in Caerphilly at the moment, but this is where I grew up in Blackwood, and I still live there. In fact, I bought a house that's 30 seconds away from where I grew up. I moved all my belongings from one house to another in a wheelbarrow, and the reason I love it is I get to travel quite a lot. Or I got to up until the last year. So I got to enjoy other cultures and enjoy other languages and other people through, I would probably travel like two out of 4 weeks. So half of every month I'd be away. And what that meant was I could enjoy being home, and I appreciated home more than because I went away. So every time I would go away, I come back home and I appreciate it a bit more. And, I grew up there. I mean, check out those fluorescent shorts. If anything says growing up in the South Wales valleys, it's these fluorescent shorts in the 90s. I love them. And I always said that I wasn't much of a photographer and a filmmaker coming up, but I remember my early life wrong. That middle photo there is obviously me doing some photography, and I actually always had a camera in my hand. I was always doing sporty things, but like I don't ever remember being fascinated about one particular thing. I did run Dinosaur Club when I was in primary school, and that wasn't actually part of the school. We found some bushes after primary school, and I would give my friends homework about what was the best dinosaur. Iguanodon is obviously the choice that you would go with. But I had a fairly regular upbringing. And then something I'm still proud of is going to university. I was the first person in my family to go to university and get a bachelor's degree. And that's actually more uncommon than we realize. Like going to university and getting a bachelor's it still isn't a common thing. It's getting more common now. But especially, in Wales and in the South Wales valleys, but all across Wales, like going to university and getting a degree isn't and wasn't when I did it a common thing to do. So I get to hang around with a lot of masters and PhDs and doctors and professors and like academics who do amazing things. And for a while, that made me value my bachelor's less, but it doesn't anymore. I am immensely proud of the bachelor's. It was in astronomy and space science, and I did some geology there as well. And I'm still immensely proud of that. And I did that at the University of South Wales, was the University of Glamorgan back then. But after that, I worked in the service industry for a while. I worked in Frankie and Benny's down in Nantgarw. Some of you might live or go around there. And I loved the service industry. I loved kind of being a waiter. I loved serving coffee and all the rest of it. And if I had another life to live, I would do that. I really enjoyed it. But then I thought I should use my degree, and I went off to TechniQuest in Cardiff Bay, the place where a lot of you might have gone on school trips to do science education. So to use my astronomy degree, and I worked in the planetarium for a while, and it was an interesting experience because I went from being in the planetarium to working in the science theatre, to then working at the office and doing more science education and what we call science communication, communicating science with the public, and doing that around the world then for TechniQuest, because they're a world-renowned science centre. They've been they're actually the oldest science centre in the UK is TechniQuest, and they are world-renowned. Like other science centres around the world come to TechniQuest to find out how they do it. So we're really lucky in South Wales, but Wales in general, at how well we talk about science. And this has become very important over the last year. How do we communicate science with the public in a factual and truthful and efficient way? And because of coronavirus and the health implications of it, everyone's learned that you have to talk about science. You have to talk in a factual way that's understandable for everyone. And we forget that TechniQuest, some of the oldest science centre in the UK, did this well. And we have a great history in Wales of being able to take complex science and communicate it with the public really well. So the start of my career was really in science, was that bachelor's degree in astronomy and space science with geology, and then going off to TechniQuest and talking about science for a long time. And, astronomy and science is still a massive part of my life. I do a lot of talks on the night sky, and I keep up with what's going on in astronomy. Last night, it was a fireball that streamed across across the top of Gloucester. And I recently I learned from that there's a UK Fireball Association, which seems like the best association ever. But I traveled out to America for a solar eclipse back in 2017. Was supposed to go to Chile just in December to see one, but obviously with COVID that was called off. But I spent a lot of time kind of going to different areas to do astronomy and study the night sky. So it was still a big part of my life, and it informed me about how I should think about the world, because the way scientists think is a little bit different to the way a lot of people think. I had the analogy that a lot of people think of the world like lawyers do, so that they come to a conclusion, they have an opinion on something, and then they'll find information to back up that opinion, right? Scientists do it the other way around, and it's something that I would suggest everyone do it the other way around, where you get all the facts and all the evidence, and based on that facts and evidence and the news and everything else, you come to a conclusion after that. So you see how it's the opposite way around. Lawyers and how normally the general public think is you'll have an opinion on something and then find facts to back it up. With scientists, what I think everyone should do is form an opinion based on the facts. And being a scientist and growing up and learning the scientific method, and you really do, especially in university, learn the scientific method. You learn that in schools specifically, you don't tend to learn how to learn. You don't learn to explore things. Nowadays in education, you do kind of learn knowledge, and we seem to think that knowledge equals science, but it doesn't. Science is the process that you go through to get to facts and knowledge. So knowing that and knowing how to be skeptical about things, knowing how to draw conclusions based on observations and a hypothesis, that really went to inform everything I did, including my journeys in adventure and looking at the world analytically. I didn't get into adventuring and I do a lot of rock climbing and mountaineering. Didn't get into it until probably after university. I always dabbled in it. I always enjoyed, through school, I was on all the teams. I was on the football team and the rugby team and badminton and squash and all the rest. But then what I really enjoyed after university was seeing the world and doing adventures. So, everywhere from, this is actually the Brecon Beacons. We've just had a really cold spell, which we haven't had since like 2012, and all the ice waterfalls. This is the north face of Penavan, and all the ice waterfalls came in this winter, but we weren't allowed out. We had stay-at-home orders because of COVID and whatnot. So, adventures can be right on your doorstep. They can be, this is 40 minutes from my house with a little walk in between, but they can be anywhere around the world as well. This is up in the Rocky, well, actually it's the Grand Tetons, part of the Rocky Mountain range in America. So a couple of years ago, and then the Alps, like traveling down into places like France for adventures is kind of wonderful. You get to see different cultures, and I love the way that the French do things. You can kind of see me just over there on that little ridge with my colleague Joby. So adventuring really has become a way to see the world, and it's the classic, people ask classic questions of why do people climb mountains? There's even a song all about it, and it's difficult to describe why someone would do it. And it kind of comes back to, if you don't know why someone climbs mountains or why someone has adventures, then you'll never know it unless you try it for yourself. And these kind of views, waking up, we camped not far from, well, actually where the camera is, this is where we camped, and then we walked down onto that ridge line. So waking up above the clouds at almost 4,000 meters, it was very cold. It was probably about, I think with wind chill as well, it's probably about -20 on that night, because you're up very high, and the higher you get, the colder it gets, and more wind. This was on the side of a ridge. It's the Aiguille de Midi. That's the Midi Plan ridge across in the French Alps. Mont Blanc is, if you imagine you're looking this way towards that scene, behind you is Mont Blanc, the tallest mountain in Europe. So, waking up and at sunrise and wandering around there, and then catching the cable car back down, because there's a cable car that goes right up to this spot, almost near this spot, means that you can have great adventures and see the world, see things that other people never get to see. And that's part of why we do adventures. Part of why I do adventures is so that we can see things that that you might not get to see otherwise. It doesn't come without its risks. We plan for these risks like all the time. Like I'm now a professional mountain leader. The mountain leader award via the MTA here in the UK is really wonderful. And my colleague there, Danny, is a guide in the Alps. So you take if anything, we plan for those risks more than we do in our everyday lives. You see, I've got a rope on there as well. So when we do these kind of adventures, you are inherently always aware of the risks where you aren't always aware of the risks in everyday life. But it's not just mountaineering, it's also things like diving. I'm a qualified diver. So going out of my way to dive in some quite cold spots is quite exciting.
So we've literally just jumped out of diving between two tectonic plates at Silfra in Iceland. So where the mid-Atlantic ridge is splitting apart, getting America and Europe further apart, is a place in Silfra in a lake where you can dive in between the two of them. You can touch the European and the American plate both together, and the water is absolutely unbelievable. So clear, partly because it's crystal clear water, because there's a little part of a glacier run through which pushes all the sediment out from the area where we were diving in. But it's the best dry suit diving, so you have a suit on that no water gets into, and it makes it, it's not actually that cold, but it's a great place to go and see how geology works, see how the earth works. Silfra diving is amazing.
So it wasn't always cold spots. I've always also been diving in a few warmer spots. This is off the coast of Peru, diving with sea lions. They're wonderful, wonderful creatures. So I've done a lot of travel, gone a lot of places, seen a lot of things, but getting those qualifications, learning how to be safe in those environments, like getting a diving qualification, getting a mountain leading qualification, almost hit my head in real life and there. Getting those qualifications and learning how to work in those environments was really, really interesting. And my passion for photography has also been the same. This is in Morocco. We climbed Mount Toubkal in Morocco. It's the highest spot in North Africa. But being a photographer, seeing the world through a lens has meant that I can earn a living from that. I'm a professional photographer, and I get paid for my photography. But also it means that I can show other people. I talked about that in the film at the start. Like being able to show people the wonders of the world that we go to is really interesting. Going to this is the snout of the Glacier du Tour in France. It's receding at quite a rate. It links up with science because through these photographs you can show people how glaciers are changing. You can show people how environments are changing. You can provoke emotional responses in people with certain photography. There's no one better at that than the team at National Geographic and the team of photographers they have. It's really important to share, especially nowadays and age, good photography with the world, because we sometimes live on our own little bubble, and a lot of us haven't been outside Wales for a year or so especially out of the UK. So having this photography and seeing the world from other people's viewpoints is really important. Obviously, when you start to make those photos move, you get into more of the filmmaking, and this has been a recent change for me. Doing filmmaking, I really found it when I worked at TechniQuest, I did a lot of public speaking. I worked a lot on like delivering presentations and shows and things. And then about 7 years ago, I started a company, Anterior's Education, working from the field, and we did live Skype classroom calls into schools. And our first ever trip was down to Mount Etna, and in Sicily. I drove 2,500 miles over 4 days down there and back, 4 days each way. Why I didn't ask someone else to drive part of it, I'm not quite sure. But if you have a look at Etna on social media at the moment, it's the highest active volcano in Europe, and it's currently going nuts. There's so much lava coming out of Mount Etna at the moment. It's really worth a look. But down there, I started to develop my filmmaking skills, and never done a filmmaking course ever. Didn't study it. Just part of that learning process, I watch a lot of YouTube videos on filmmaking. So whether that's like in front of the camera or behind it, obviously you got to try and, with this face, you got to try and look at least some kind of presentable on camera. So a lot of my time was spent doing stuff in front of the camera, like talking to camera about the environments that we were in, but also then getting my drone pilot's license and becoming a professional drone pilot, and doing more filmmaking in regions like this, learning the technical aspects of how to be a filmmaker, like knowing being unapologetically geeky about stuff. I really think that the difference between nerd and geek, the way that I separate those out, is nerd is something that you inherently are, and geek is you are geeky about something. So you can be geeky about football or film or adventure or whatever, but like I am geeky about filmmaking. I love knowing all the technical aspects for it and whatnot. And same for climbing. I really enjoy like knowing about all the technical aspects of the gear that we use and whatnot. I've even got a show called Gear Geeks, and it's literally about that. It's about all the gear that we use and the strength ratings and how waterproof it is and all the rest. But it's the same for film. Like you have to have some kind of eye for doing certain things, but you can learn that, and you can learn like how to technically be better at it. But I spend a lot of my time just researching, learning new cameras and working with new people and whatnot. And what that's led to over the years is a bunch of work. Like I started my company about 10 years ago, just over, which is something I don't really give myself a lot of props for. I was supposed to have my 10-year anniversary, but it was during lockdown. I don't want to celebrate that much, but I was going to celebrate 10 years of working for yourself, which is a milestone. Like a lot of companies don't make it past 2. But, the way that I do work a lot of the time is for social good. A lot of my stuff is about increasing scientific literacy around the world, teaching people about science, about climate change, like doing activism work and whatnot, training other people and lifting them up to do that kind of stuff. So a lot of my work at the moment is doing that. My company, Anterior's Education, makes education resources for schools, and we give those away for free at anteriors.co.uk, because we believe that teachers have enough stuff to do, and they could do with having some resources that they don't have to go their way for. So we give those away for free on anteriors.co.uk. A lot of my work is still in science, so working with young people to explain different types of science, to explain how the world works, new types of science that comes out at the moment, like especially over the last year with COVID and whatnot. Doing live shows, so I still do a lot of public speaking. Over the course of my career, been about 15 years in doing science communication, I've seen something like 750,000 people live, like in person, like this kind of thing, like these kind of shows, talking about science. This is a show we did out in Hong Kong for Hong Kong Science Festival, and we did it in English, but with a Cantonese translator. So we did an hour-long show with 2 presenters and a stagehand and a translator. And a lot of people think that presenting to camera is talking to camera, where I'd argue that, or presenting in general, talking on stage is just talking. But I'd very much argue that that's one of the things you need to do, and whilst you do everything else. So running to time, this had a lot of props and demonstrations. Like that's a smoke cannon that we were using. We'd have liquid nitrogen and chemicals and all these other things. you'd have a slideshow behind you. You'd be working with the audience and asking them questions and getting them out. So there's a lot to developing and producing these kind of things, these events, and talking is just one of them. So talking live is difficult. And on the podcast I just did for this, which is online somewhere on the Twitter feed, we talked about this and how much you need to do on top of the things that people see, like an iceberg. People see the finished product, they see the thing that's on top, and they don't see all the stuff that's underneath. But knowing about the science, being able to communicate science well, making films to go on my presentations, doing photography to go into shows like this, all those things come together to get me this work and allow me to do this kind of stuff. We've just opened a little studio in Caerphilly, well, about a year ago, but now it seems like that was yesterday. And we've just filmed a couple of podcasts. With the first one, no one's seen this yet. This is a sneak peek. It's with Shane Williams. So this is Kiva Studio I'm currently in now. And we just launched our first podcast with this is with Shane Williams, all about entrepreneurship and business in Wales. And a lot of people are saying that Wales is like the place to open businesses at the moment because the Welsh government are pushing it so much. But again, without my filmmaking and photography skills, and without being able to communicate ideas simply, this kind of stuff wouldn't work for me. Like, I wouldn't know how to do podcasts and films unless I had that kind of analytical, skeptical side of science in me as well. The one thing that's missing from this part of it is the adventure part. I'm in Caerphilly, I'm sat in my little studio, and that's about it. But yeah, really interesting. My friend Tim there is presenting. I've known him since I was 3 years old. So we're lucky enough to work together. And that's one of the nice things about living where you grew up, is you've still got the same friends. But a lot of my work then does take me more international. So I work with Royal Caribbean Cruises, specifically Celebrity, which is an offshoot of those, to talk about, we do the science on their ships. So their youth team has about 75,000 kids that come through every year, and they want to do science of glaciers and marine biology and climate change and all this kind of stuff. And we develop those resources, me and my team that I subcontract to. So I've got a couple of businesses. I subcontract a lot of people. I really enjoy working with other people, but I make sure that they're not employed by me. They tell me what they are worth, what their value is, and I pay them that. I'm very aware that I don't want to be paying people anything less than what they think that they're worth. If they think they're worth too much, then I won't employ them. But and if they think they're worth too little, I'll make sure I pay them more. One of my friends just done a bunch of work for me, and work that he completed about 5 years ago. And I told him to send me an invoice for that work from 5 years ago, because I wasn't really able to pay him well at the time. But to a certain extent, people work for other stuff in self-employment and in business, freelance work. We say there's two paychecks. There's one in cash that you get, and that's what you pay for everything with. But then there's also the second paycheck, which comes in exposure, in travel, in social good, in enjoyment, and everything else. And sometimes when I work with people, they'll do it because they love it. They'll do it because they want to do it. They'll do it as a favor. But then if I can reward them in that first paycheck again at some point, then I will. But yeah, I work with Royal Caribbean. It's been fun. It's kind of taken me all over the world, and I get to go on cruises and stuff. And yeah, it's good. We're working with Salomon at the moment, which is a big outdoor company, all about the great outdoors, and specifically looking at this is a science project we're working on them with. So we're looking at how much plastic comes off of running shoes over a given period of time. So we're getting 30 of the best athletes around the world, and giving them trainers. We're working with a university down in Plymouth to look at how much rubber comes off the soles of your feet. 10% of the plastic in the oceans is from car tires. So we were wondering what that is for shoes, for running shoes. Runners, I'm a runner and I get through shoes quite a lot. How much of that wears off your feet ends up going into the environment, washed down into the sewers and in the drains, and then going off into the environment. My science background, my filmmaking background, because we're doing a film for this, my photography background, and my adventure background all come together for this one program, this one project. And my career I could add businessmen into that mix of things that I am now. And reaching out to those kind of big companies. People often ask, how do you go about working with big companies? And I always say that I think that there has to be a win-win. When you work with people, everyone has to win somehow. Unless you're doing a favor for someone and then you're just doing it for them altruistically. But you end up having some practice and doing things. But like normally, if you want to work with a big company, and I've worked with quite a few, Salomon being the one here, and Sunto, who make watches, they have to get something out of it as well. So when you approach people, when you approach any kind of organization, my number one thing to say is, I've got a cool project. I think you'll really love it, and we can both get something out of it. That's something that I really enjoy doing. And nothing kind of epitomizes that more than the new project I'm doing with Kilian Jornet and the Athlete Climate Academy. Kilian it's not hyperbole to say he's the best ultra runner in the world. Again, this project hasn't been launched yet, but we're doing a project where we teach a bunch of professional athletes, some of the best in the world, about climate change and how they can influence their peers, the people that follow them, their sponsors on the climate change problem and the pollution problem. So yeah, we're just starting this now. It's going to start in like April, May. Kilian's out in the Himalaya from doing something that I'm not overly sure is like top secret, but I'm sure it'll be amazing. He has the fastest known time on a lot of stuff. He's pretty good at almost everything. And then the one of the more exciting companies I work with, or organizations, National Geographic. I've worked with them for quite a few years now. I get to train their explorers in both public speaking and filmmaking, and they're a great company. They're really, really wonderful, and the scientists that they sponsor is amazing. So we're working on a new project where we're doing some filmmaking with a bunch of their explorers. I teach them. So this is everything. So we're doing public speaking, which is something that I've trained in for a long time. On stage talking about science, or on camera talking about science, which again is two of my big things. So we're doing filmmaking. They're all adventurers because they are, like, some of them will work in the Serengeti, some of them work in the Arctic, some of them work in the Antarctic, some of them work up high on glaciers, some of them will work in jungles, and everything in between. So I know what it's like for those scientists to work in those locations. So I try and make sure that I'm empathetic to what they've got to do. And we're making films, and they're doing public speaking. So every single one of the things that I developed and learned over the last kind of 10, 15 years come together in just this one big project. And there's not many projects that I'm doing now that don't use at least three of like the 4 or 5 big skills that I've learned over the last 15 years. And I really truly believe that it's that intersectional place where all those things converge that makes you special. On the podcast we did for this, I talked about unique selling point, your USP. And for products, that might be something that it does this thing that you really wanted to do. But for humans, it's difficult to know what your USP is. But if you are a person that can do filmmaking, adventure, photography, public speaking, and science, like those things make me. So what are those things that make you? What are you going to learn, become qualified in, and push your curiosity and your exploration to the limits to become your USP, the way that you're going to excel yourself in your career. So we've got a couple of questions coming through. Really appreciate that. Thank you for that, sitting through that talk. So let's tackle a couple of these questions, and feel free to keep sending them through. One of which is, what are your top 3 tips for someone looking to go into a niche career like yours? That's such an interesting one. Top 3 tips on going into a niche career like mine. My career doesn't exist as a thing. Creating your own career, your own business, your own being self-employed in that way. It's a difficult one because my actual career doesn't exist. So what I've tried to do is create lots of mini careers, and merge them all together to make one big career. I don't know if Power Rangers is still a thing, but like lots of mini things that make one large thing. And that really helps when it comes to business. I was just speaking to a mate of mine this morning about having all your eggs in one basket through this pandemic has been really bad for people. And it's also bad if, like in Port Talbot, the steelworks shut down, and those steelworkers, that's all they knew. And they were great at it. And it's that, do you become very specialist at what you do and really brilliant at it? Or do you become a jack of Jane of all trades and become quite, I always tell people that I'm really average at almost everything I do, and I love it. Being a jack of all trades like that at everything. It means that all my eggs aren't in one basket, so I can pick up photography, commercial photography for people. Tomorrow I'm doing some commercial filmmaking, or I can do some science, or I can do anything. So I think insatiable learning and becoming qualified at lots of different things, I think would be my one top tip. I'll use that as 3. How did you start out funding your travels? Oh my gosh. So back in 2013, when I started Antiris, no one would fund us. When I first went self-employed 10 years ago, I picked up 5 part-time jobs because I needed the money. I sold a bunch of my stuff. I sold my moped. It's the one downside to being self-employed and owning your own business is the financial difficulties that go with it, which can be very, very rewarding, but will always be, even when you're doing well, you've got a lot of invoices coming in, it's still there, but you can learn to be okay with that. And spending more than you want to accrue new gear so that you can go out and make new stuff, and then you can earn more money, and it's that kind of battle. And then in 2013, no one would fund our first trip to Mount Etna. So I took a business loan out. I bought a Citroen Berlingo on a Tuesday, secondhand, and drove 2,500 miles to Mount Etna on the Friday. I don't recommend people do that, but it was something that we did because no one would fund us. What would be your top tips for getting into professional photography by networking? Wildlife and nature photography and filmmaking is a great passion of mine. So I'd love to know how you made the jump into professional photography. Would you say getting a drone pilot license helped you in reaching goals? Every qualification that I have has helped me in some kind of way, shape, or form. Being qualified kind of pushes you from that kind of amateur status into the professional status. And not only that, but you learn a lot doing them. Like for the drone pilots course, it's literally I went to Bristol, and you sit in the same room that pilots do their training in, and you learn about airfields and airspace and whatever else. It's like a 4-day course and a couple of exams. But you can't be a commercial drone pilot in the UK without it. So you kind of have to do it if you want to do it professionally. Same with mountaineering, you have to have a qualification for it. But you learn so much on those courses. So I use qualifications often as an excuse to learn more things. So making that, getting into it and just getting out and starting to do it. I often tell the proverb of making pots, and people who know me will get just hate how many times I tell this story. But a teacher's got a group of students and asks one half of the class to make the perfect pot, spend a whole month researching and creating the one perfect pot. Then says to the other half of the class, go out and make as many pots as you possibly can in a month. And then we're going to review the last one that you make, and which group after the month has the best pot. And quite often you'll find that it's the one that's made the most pots, right? Like you go out and you do photography lots, you end up getting good at it because you've done it so much. You notice the mistakes, you emulate others. Looking at other people's photography and other people's filmmaking is really good for that. Emulating what you think is good and throwing out what you think is bad. And then networking. If you want to get into wildlife filmmaking, over in the Natural History Unit over in Bristol, it's a wonderful bunch of people, and like getting in touch with those and working with that team. A lot of them are on Twitter and on social media, and you can get them through there. But there is a real kind of big game in Bristol for wildlife filmmaking. It's where they make, I think it's something like 75% of the world's natural history documentaries comes out of Bristol. It's insane. But obviously we run a lot of those courses here in Wales. The natural history degree in University of South Wales, I taught on there for a while, doing digital media and teaching filmmaking. So, whether it's University of South Wales, there's a big SciComm course at Cardiff University. All these places will set you up really. There's a bunch of production companies in Cardiff that do big kind of natural history documentaries and adventure documentaries. So, we've got it all going on here too. How do you factor in environmental impacts into travel and contracting with cruise companies? Yeah, it's difficult. I have to sit and live with that every day. Cruise companies are by far not good for the environment, but if we can put STEM and STEM learning onto those cruise ships that teaches kids about climate change, and I do talk about climate change. I often feel like we're in the lion's den making a change. It's whether you make change from the outside or to make change from the inside. And I fly a lot. I don't have kids, which is by far one of the worst things you can do for the environment. Not saying people shouldn't do it, but eating meat as well. I try and cut out as much meat as possible. The one thing that I do a lot of is flying, or used to. We pay a company that plants trees and does rewilding. Know that that's carbon offset and offsets carbon guilt, but we do a little. But it's difficult. It's difficult, and when it comes to environmental issues, we need change from the top. From I think it's something like 7 of the world's biggest companies contribute 50% of the carbon emissions. So, I'm not saying that we don't have an impact, but we need to work from the top down, and that's what we're really trying to do, is implement that change. Reach out to me on LinkedIn for sure, or on Twitter. I'll come back to that one after this next question. If you were to change the course of your career now, what do you think you would go into? I wouldn't. I would not change it. I absolutely love it. How would you combine a background in earth science with charity or socially conscious organizations? I've been speaking to WWF Cymru, who are a wonderful organization here in Wales, Size of Wales, Environmental Platform Wales. Like, we've got so many. Wales is leading the charge in the climate change area. We were one of the first to have Future Generations Commission, one of the first to call a climate emergency. We are leading the way. So, mixing an earth science degree or an earth science kind of line with charities, looking at our impacts on the environment, especially across Wales. We're losing a lot of peat bogs at the moment. We want to become, it's a big call for us to become the first deforestation-free nation. So earth sciences really go hand in hand with social change and those charities. Right, I'll do this last one, and then I'll do the LinkedIn one. there any parts of your career that you regret or would change if you got to go back? No. And you know what? Like, I look back on my 10 years of being self-employed, and I cringe at some of the first things that I did. Absolutely cringe. There's a few things that I made mistakes on, but mistakes are inherent in business. You've just got to learn from them. So make as many mistakes as you want, but you must learn from them and you must progress from them. So my filmmaking 5 years ago was pretty bad. My photography, my presenting to the camera, all the rest of it. And I'm still improving. I had a conversation this morning about training for voiceover, how I can get better at that. So it comes back to make sure you're always learning and never stop learning. Reach out to me on thank you very much to everyone for the questions. Reach out to me on LinkedIn for sure, Twitter, I'm on Facebook and Instagram too, Huw M. James, Huw M. James. You could reach out to me on all of those and have a chat. I'm more than happy to chat to people about, especially pushing this industry in Wales. We are very good at it, but we can always be better. We can always learn more, and we can always do more. And we're in a moment now where we have to do more. We have to push the world to be better. And that can definitely come from Wales. So I'm very excited to see what everyone gets up to in their careers going forward. And I'm really excited to see where we can learn together on these blended careers. So thank you so much for all those questions. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I shall definitely see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Have a good virtual careers fair.